The clink of ice against crystal was the only sound Arthur Pendleton noticed, in the hushed elegance of Geneva's l'Orangerie du Parc. Every detail was curated for perfection: the aged scotch, the view of the lake, the billion-dollar deal hanging in the air. His dinner companion, Sterling Blackwood, smiled a predator's smile. But as a young waitress refilled his water, she leaned impossibly close, her breath a ghost against his ear. In flawless, urgent French, she whispered a single phrase that shattered the perfect evening and sent a sliver of ice straight into his heart. Ne buvez pas ça. Don't drink that. Arthur froze his hand, hovering over the glass, the world suddenly tilting on its axis. Arthur Pendleton didn't just inhabit the world of the wealthy, he sculpted it to his will. At 48, he possessed a face that was a road map of ruthless decisions and sleepless nights, all leading to an empire in telecommunications that spanned continents. His suit, a bespoke creation from a tailor in Savile Row, whose name was only spoken in hushed tones, was his armor. His watch, a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, wasn't for telling time. It was a statement of power, a quiet declaration that his time was worth more than most people's entire lives. Tonight, that power was being tested. He was in Geneva, the neutral ground of titans, to close the deal of his career, the acquisition of Blackwood Dynamics. Sterling Blackwood. The man sitting opposite him was the final obstacle. Blackwood was everything. Arthur despised old money, slicked back silver hair, and a belief that his pedigree entitled him to success. He was a shark, circling a prize he hadn't earned, and Arthur was the Leviathan from the deep, ready to swallow him whole. The restaurant L'Orangerie du Parc was a masterpiece of understated opulence. Towering glass walls afforded a breathtaking view of Lake Geneva, its surface a dark mirror reflecting the distant, glittering lights of the city. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and the nervous energy of new ambition. Here fortunes were made and lost over truffle-infused risotto and glasses of wine that cost more than a monthly salary. "To the future, Arthur," Sterling said, raising his glass of Macallan 25. The amber liquid caught the light, a jewel of distilled time. "May it be as prosperous as our pasts." Arthur forced a smile, the gesture feeling foreign on his face. He didn't believe in toasting the future. He believed in seizing it. "To a smooth transition, Sterling." They had been negotiating for 6 agonizing months. Blackwood Dynamics held a portfolio of next-generation satellite patents that were crucial for Arthur's global 6G network. Blackwood had fought him at every turn, bleeding him for every possible concession. But now, they were here. The final contracts were with the lawyers, waiting for a simple confirmation call in the morning. This dinner was a formality. A victor's toast. Or so he thought. The conversation was a delicate dance, a veneer of civility over a chasm of mutual distrust. They spoke of markets, of politics, of mutual acquaintances who had fallen from grace. Sterling was charming, almost reptilian in his grace, his words smooth and polished. But his eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, held a chilling emptiness. They were the eyes of a man who had been backed into a corner and was looking for any way out. "Another for you, Arthur." Sterling gestured to the bar cart a waiter had just wheeled over. "I took the liberty of ordering something special to celebrate. A 1957 Talisker, one of only a handful of bottles left in the world. A fitting drink for a moment like this." A waiter, a man with a stiff collar and a practiced air of invisibility, poured the scotch into a heavy crystal glass. It was darker than the Macallan, almost the color of burnt caramel. He placed it carefully on a leather coaster in front of Arthur. Arthur nodded his thanks, his focus entirely on Sterling. He felt the familiar thrill of the kill. The deal was done. The contracts were ironclad. By this time tomorrow, Blackwood's patents, his legacy would belong to Pendleton Corp. As the waiter retreated, a young waitress approached the table. She was perhaps in her early 20s, with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb everything. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was different from the other staff, less rehearsed, more innate. Her uniform was crisp, but a single stray curl had escaped her tight bun, resting on her temple. She carried a silver pitcher of water, her movements fluid and precise. She filled Sterling's glass first, then moved to Arthur's side. He barely registered her presence, his mind already calculating the stock market surge his acquisition would trigger. As she leaned over to pour the water, her shoulder brushed his. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible contact. And then came the whisper. It was so soft, he almost thought he'd imagined it, a phantom sound in the low hum of the restaurant. Her voice was a low, urgent murmur right beside his ear, shielded from Sterling by the simple act of pouring water. Ne buvez pas ça. The French was perfect, unaccented. The words were simple, yet they landed with the force of a physical blow. Don't drink that. Time seemed to warp. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the distant laughter, the clink of silverware, the soft jazz from an unseen piano faded into a dull roar. All Arthur could hear was the frantic, sudden pounding of his own heart. He looked down at the glass of Talisker, the rare, celebratory scotch. It sat there gleaming under the soft lights, looking less like a prize and more like a threat. He lifted his eyes from the glass. The waitress was already retreating, her face a mask of professional neutrality. She hadn't looked at him. Not once. She blended back into the seamless choreography of the dining room, just another anonymous server. But she had just thrown a grenade into the most important evening of his life. Arthur froze. His hand, which had been reaching for the glass, stopped midair, a statue of indecision. Across the table, Sterling's predatory smile hadn't wavered. He lifted his own glass. "Come now, Arthur." Sterling coaxed, his voice smooth as silk. "A drink to seal our new partnership." Arthur's mind, a machine built for rapid calculation and risk assessment, went into overdrive. Every instinct honed by decades of navigating corporate treachery screamed at him. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. And in his world, warnings were lifelines you ignored at your peril. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Sterling Blackwood's smile remained fixed, but a flicker of impatience danced in his pale blue eyes. He was waiting, the glass held aloft, a silent demand for compliance. For Arthur, the world had narrowed to the space between his hand and the crystal tumbler of scotch. The dark liquid swirled innocently, a siren's call in a sea of uncertainty. Ne buvez pas ça. The waitress's whisper echoed in his mind, sharp and clear. Who was she? How could she possibly know anything, and what precisely was he not supposed to drink? The scotch was the obvious answer. It had been brought specifically for him, ordered by Sterling. It was the centerpiece of this celebration. His thoughts raced, sifting through possibilities with the speed of a supercomputer. Possibility 1. It was a hoax, a bizarre, meaningless prank by a disgruntled employee. Unlikely. The risk to her job was too great, and her tone held no trace of mischief. It was pure, unadulterated urgency. Possibility 2. She was mistaken. She'd overheard something, misinterpreted it, and was now acting on faulty intelligence. Possible, but the specificity of her action, whispering to him and only him, argued against it. Possibility 3. She was telling the truth. The drink was tainted. Poison. It seemed absurdly theatrical, something from a Cold War spy novel. Men like Sterling Blackwood didn't resort to poison. They used lawyers' hostile takeovers and market manipulation. But Arthur also knew that desperation could make men discard their usual playbooks. Sterling was losing his company, his legacy. He was a proud man, facing utter humiliation. Was murder beyond him? Perhaps not murder. Maybe something more subtle. A drug. Something to incapacitate him, make him ill. A fast-acting sedative that would make him appear to have a medical emergency, creating chaos. In that chaos, what could Sterling gain? A delay. An opportunity to alter the deal. Or maybe it was a substance designed to make him pliable, confused. A truth serum of sorts to extract some last piece of information before the final handover. The thought sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. Arthur had to act. Sitting frozen was an admission of suspicion. Drinking the scotch was an unthinkable risk. He needed a third option. He needed a distraction. With a fluid motion that belied his inner turmoil, Arthur moved his hand. Not toward the glass, but toward the heavy linen napkin in his lap. As he brought it up, he allowed his elbow to jerk outward a motion that looked entirely natural, if a little clumsy for a man of his usual precision. His elbow connected with the base of the crystal tumbler. The result was instantaneous and dramatic. The glass toppled, spilling its precious dark contents across the starched white tablecloth. The 1957 Talisker, a spirit worth thousands, soaked into the pristine linen, staining it a deep, ugly brown. A few drops splashed onto the leg of Sterling's trousers. "Oh, for God's sake!" Arthur exclaimed, his voice a perfect blend of frustration and embarrassment. He shot to his feet, dabbing at the spreading stain with his napkin. "My apologies, Sterling. How incredibly clumsy of me." "I am so sorry." Sterling flinched back as the scotch hit his suit. His charming facade cracking for a moment to reveal raw irritation. "Arthur, this is an Armani." "My sincerest apologies," Arthur repeated, waving frantically for a waiter. "Please allow me to cover the cleaning, of course. I don't know what came over me." The staff descended on their table immediately. The head waiter looked at the stain on the tablecloth as if it were a mortal wound. Spoons and cloths appeared. The ruined glass was swept away. The efficiency was absolute. In the midst of the controlled chaos, Arthur's eyes scanned the dining room. He was looking for her. The waitress. He spotted her near a service station by the kitchen doors, stacking clean plates. She wasn't looking at their table, but he could feel her awareness of the scene. Her posture was rigid. She knew what he had done, and she knew why. "Forget the suit," Sterling said, his composure returning, though his voice was tight. "It's the principle of the thing. Wasting a scotch like that. It's a tragedy." He was trying to sound jovial, but the attempt fell flat. "You're right. A tragedy." Arthur agreed, settling back into his chair as a waiter expertly replaced the soiled tablecloth with a fresh one. "Perhaps it's a sign. We should stick to the Macallan." He raised his original half-full glass. "To our continued health, Sterling." Sterling eyed him for a long moment, his gaze sharp and calculating. Was he searching for a sign of deception? Did he suspect the accident was anything but? Arthur met his gaze evenly, his face a mask of apologetic carelessness. After a beat that felt like a lifetime, Sterling seemed to accept the explanation. He grunted, dabbing at his trousers with a napkin. "Health and wealth," Sterling finally conceded, clinking his glass against Arthur's. The moment had passed. The immediate threat was neutralized. But the danger hadn't vanished. It had only receded into the shadows. The game had changed. This wasn't just a business negotiation anymore. It was something far more perilous. Arthur knew he couldn't leave. Bolting from the restaurant would signal to Sterling that he knew something potentially spooking him into a different, more direct course of action. He had to see this dinner through to its end, maintaining the charade of normalcy. But he had to get to that waitress. He had to know who she was and what she knew. The entire foundation of his billion-dollar deal, and perhaps his life, rested on the whisper of a woman whose name he didn't even know. He waited for a lull in the conversation, feigning a sudden need to respond to an urgent message. "Excuse me for a moment, Sterling," he said, pulling out his phone. "My COO in New York. You know how it is, the market never sleeps." Sterling waved a dismissive hand. "Of course. Take your time." Arthur stood and walked away from the table, not toward the restroom, but in the direction of the bar, his phone pressed to his ear, in a convincing pantomime of a serious call. His path would take him right past the service station where he'd last seen her. His heart pounded a steady, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He was walking into the unknown, guided only by 4 whispered words in French. Arthur walked with a purpose that concealed his racing pulse. Each step was measured, his face a mask of corporate focus as he held the phone to his ear, murmuring nonsense phrases about quarterly reports and market fluctuations. His eyes, however, were locked on his target. The waitress was still there, near the swinging doors to the kitchen, arranging silverware on a tray. As he drew near, her head lifted slightly. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second, a flicker of acknowledgement before darting away. It was enough. He didn't break stride. He walked past her, continuing toward the far end of the bar, then turned a corner into a quiet, wood-paneled corridor that led to the private dining rooms, and he hoped a service entrance. The corridor was empty. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of his footsteps. He weighted his back to the wall, feigning frustration with his fictional phone call. "No, Michael, that's unacceptable. Rewrote the projections through the Singapore office. I'll handle it when I land." He heard a soft footfall behind him. The faint scent of lavender and starched linen reached him. "You were right to do that," a quiet voice said. He ended his fake call and turned slowly. It was her. Up close, he could see the tension etched around her dark eyes, the fierce intelligence that burned within them. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a soldier on a battlefield only she could see. "Who are you?" Arthur asked, his voice low and devoid of pleasantries. "My name is Anouk Dubois," she said, her French accent more pronounced now that she wasn't whispering. "And I'm the person who just saved you from a great deal of trouble." "Trouble?" Arthur's voice was laced with skepticism. "That's a mild word for what you implied. I need specifics. What was in that drink?" Anouk glanced back down the corridor, ensuring they were alone. "I don't know the exact chemical compound, but I know what it does. It's not a lethal poison. It's worse. It's an aggressive amnestic agent, mixed with a powerful hypnotic. Within 20 minutes, it would have rendered you highly susceptible to suggestion, while simultaneously wiping your short-term memory of the evening. You would have agreed to anything signed, anything. And tomorrow morning you would remember nothing but having a pleasant dinner with Sterling Blackwood. Arthur felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was more sophisticated and more insidious than he could have imagined. It wasn't about killing him. It was about hijacking his will, stealing his company from under his nose with his own signature. "How do you know this?" he demanded. "How do you know about Sterling Blackwood's plans? Because this isn't about you, Mr. Pendleton," she said, her gaze unflinching. "This is about him. I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to destroy him." The raw hatred in her voice was startling. This was personal, deeply personal. Arthur was just a pawn in her game, a useful, necessary pawn. "Why?" he pressed. "What did he do to you?" "He destroyed my family," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, thick with a pain that was clearly years old. "My father was a brilliant man, a research chemist. Sterling Blackwood was his junior partner years ago back in Lyon. Blackwood stole my father's work, patented it as his own, and built his entire company on the foundation of that theft. He left my father with nothing. No credit, no career, no money. Just a mountain of accusations of fraud that Blackwood himself had fabricated to cover his tracks." Arthur listened, his corporate brain analyzing this new, shocking data. It recontextualized everything. Sterling wasn't just a privileged rival. He was a thief, a fraud. And this young woman was the ghost of his first crime. "How did you find out about tonight, about the drug?" "I've been watching him for years," Anouk said, a grim determination hardening her features. "I followed his career, learned his habits. I knew this deal with you was his last stand. I got a job here a month ago, when I found out through a source that he'd booked this dinner. I suspected he would try something desperate. Then 3 days ago, I intercepted a communication. He was arranging a clandestine purchase from a disgraced chemist in Eastern Europe. The chemist specialized in unique pharmacological agents. I put it all together." Arthur was stunned by her resourcefulness, her dedication to a cause forged in family tragedy. She was no ordinary waitress. She was an intelligence operative fueled by vengeance. "So you warned me," he stated, the pieces clicking into place. "You need me conscious and in control to stop him." "I need more than that," she corrected him. "A spilled drink proves nothing. He'll just try again another way, another time. I need to expose him, for what he is and for what he did to my father. He has the vial with the rest of the drug on him. I saw him slip it into his inside jacket pocket before you arrived." A new audacious plan began to form in Arthur's mind. It was risky, almost insane, but the potential payoff was enormous. Not just securing his deal, but utterly demolishing his rival in a way that no courtroom ever could. "You have a recording device, don't you?" Arthur asked, a shrewd guess. A flicker of surprise in her eyes. "A small one, in my apron." "Good," Arthur said, his voice now charged with the energy of a predator scenting blood. "Because we are not going to run. We are not going to call the police. We're going back to that table. You are going to find a way to serve us one more round of drinks. And this time, we're going to make sure Sterling Blackwood gets the special glass." Anouk stared at him, her dark eyes wide. She had expected him to be grateful to flee. She had not expected him to turn her quest for revenge into a weapon of corporate warfare. "That's insane," she breathed. "Is it?" Arthur countered, a cold, ruthless smile touching his lips for the first time that evening. He wanted to play a dirty game. He has no idea how dirty I can play. You want your justice, Anouk. Help me, and I will give you more than justice. I will give you a reckoning." She looked at him, seeing past the billion-dollar suit and the powerful facade. She saw a man who was in his own way as dangerous and determined as Sterling Blackwood. But his interests for this one night were perfectly aligned with hers. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "What do I have to do?" The alliance was forged. In the quiet corridor of a Swiss restaurant, the Millionaire and the Waitress, bound by a shared enemy, prepared to turn the tables. The real battle was about to begin. Before they returned to the dining room, to the battlefield, Arthur needed to understand the ground beneath his feet. The story of a stolen legacy was the what. He needed the why. He needed to feel the weight of Anouk's quest, to trust it completely. "Tell me about your father," he said, his voice softer than before. "Tell me everything." They stood in the relative sanctuary of the corridor, the distant clatter of the kitchen and the murmur of diners a world away. Anouk's gaze drifted past him, her eyes unfocusing as she summoned memories from a place of deeper-seated pain. "His name was Dr. Alistair Dubois," she began, her voice taking on a reverent quality. "To me, he was just Papa. He was the kindest man I ever knew. He smelled of old books and coffee and the strange, clean scent of the chemicals in his lab. He wasn't a businessman. He was a dreamer, a pure scientist. He believed chemistry could solve the world's greatest problems." She painted a picture of a modest life in Lyon, France, a life rich in love and intellectual curiosity, if not in material wealth. Her father worked from a small private laboratory funded by university grants and the occasional partnership. He was working on a revolutionary project, a series of non-toxic, biodegradable polymers derived from plant-based proteins. His goal was to create materials that could replace plastics in medical applications, sutures that would safely dissolve scaffolds for regenerating human tissue. It was groundbreaking, world-changing work. "That's where Sterling Blackwood came in," she said, her tone hardening. "He wasn't Blackwood then, just Sterling. A handsome, ambitious MBA graduate from America with a small family inheritance. He didn't understand the science, not really. But he understood its potential. He saw the dollar signs where my father saw a better world." Sterling had charmed his way into Alistair's life, presenting himself as a savvy partner who could handle the business side of things, patents funding marketing, leaving Alistair free to focus on his research. For a man like her father who loathed paperwork and boardrooms, it seemed like a perfect symbiosis. "My father trusted him completely." Anouk continued, a bitter edge to her words. "He gave him full access to his lab, his notes, his prototypes. For 2 years they worked together. Sterling secured some initial funding, made it all look legitimate. He would talk about their future, their company. Blackwood Dubois Innovations, he called it. The betrayal was as swift as it was total. One day Sterling announced he was flying to Zurich for a major investor meeting. He never came back. Instead, a week later, my father received a letter from a Swiss law firm. Sterling had systematically duplicated all of my father's research notes, established a new corporation in Switzerland, Blackwood Dynamics, and filed a comprehensive set of patents in his name alone. The patents covered every aspect of my father's work. Arthur listened grim-faced. He'd seen countless corporate betrayals, but this was a masterclass in predatory theft. "It got worse," Anouk whispered, hugging her arms as if warding off a chill. To prevent my father from challenging the patents, Sterling launched a preemptive strike. He used his new funding to leak fabricated evidence to the university and the scientific journals, accusing my father of academic fraud. He claimed my father had stolen his research. He buried him in lawsuits, bled him dry. My father was a scientist, not a fighter. He didn't stand a chance. Alistair Dubois was ruined. His reputation was shattered. His funding evaporated. His lab was seized to pay legal fees. The scientific community, which had once revered him, now shunned him. The weight of the betrayal and the public humiliation crushed him. He stopped eating. He stopped talking. The light just went out of his eyes. Anouk said her own eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He would just sit in his study for hours, staring at the wall. 6 months after Sterling disappeared, my father had a massive stroke. The doctors said it was brought on by extreme stress. He died in the hospital a week later. He was only 52. She finally looked at Arthur, her gaze piercing. Sterling Blackwood didn't just steal his work. He stole his life. He stole my father. I was 16 years old. I stood at his grave, and I made a promise that one day I would make Sterling pay. Not with lawyers, because he owns them, but with the truth. For the past decade, that promise had been her entire existence. She put herself through school studying finance and forensic accounting. She learned multiple languages. She took menial jobs that put her in proximity to the world Sterling inhabited, gathering information piece by piece. She became a ghost, haunting the edges of his gilded life, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Tonight was that moment. Arthur felt a surge of cold fury on her behalf. His own world was brutal, but it had rules, a code. Sterling Blackwood had violated the most fundamental tenets of honor. He wasn't just an opponent to be beaten. He was a cancer to be excised. Your father's work on biodegradable polymers, Arthur said, his mind connecting the dots. That's the foundation of Blackwood's medical tech division, isn't it? The one that's projected to be worth $10 billion in the next 5 years. The very same, Anouk confirmed. It's the crown jewel of the company you're trying to buy. You're trying to buy my father's soul. The statement hung in the air between them. Arthur realized this wasn't just about a deal anymore. Acquiring Blackwood Dynamics would mean he would possess Alistair Dubois's legacy. He had a responsibility that went beyond the bottom line. No, Arthur said, his voice quiet but firm. We're going to take it back. He looked at the recording device, a tiny pen in her apron pocket. The plan stands, but we add a new objective. I don't just want him to admit to trying to drug me. I want him to admit what he did to your father. He saw a flicker of hope ignite in her weary eyes, the first genuine glimmer he had seen all night. How? She asked. Men like Sterling are arrogant. Their greatest weakness is their pride. Arthur explained, his mind already choreographing the scene. When he's under the influence of the drug, he meant for me he'll be suggestible. I'll steer the conversation back to the past, to Lyon. I'll ask him how he really got his start. I'll praise his genius, and his ego will do the rest. He'll want to brag. We will get his confession, Anouk. We will get it all. He put a hand gently on her shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was the gesture of a general sealing a pact with his most vital soldier. Are you ready? Anouk straightened up, wiping away the single tear that had escaped. The grief in her eyes was replaced by a steely resolve. The ghost of Lyon was ready for her haunting. Let's go, she said. Let's give him the reckoning he deserves. Returning to the table was like stepping onto a stage in the middle of a play, the lighting, the props, the other actor. Everything was the same, yet fundamentally altered. Sterling Blackwood was nursing a new scotch, his earlier irritation seemingly forgotten. He looked up as Arthur approached, a lazy smile on his face. Everything sorted with New York? He asked. The usual fires, Arthur replied smoothly, taking his seat. Nothing that can't wait until morning. He felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind of hyper-focused clarity that came before a momentous event. Across the room, he saw Anouk speaking quietly to their waiter, who then nodded and headed toward the bar. The first move had been made. "Good," Sterling said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Because I feel we left our celebration on an unfortunate note. That spill, it was a bad omen. We need to rectify it." A final toast to the future of Blackwood Dynamics, or should I say, Pendleton Corp's newest and brightest division. Right on cue. Anouk arrived at their table. She carried a silver tray with 2 identical crystal tumblers, each holding a generous measure of the 1957 Talisker. Her face was a perfect mask of professional deference. No one could ever guess that she was about to orchestrate the downfall of the man she was serving. "The manager insisted, sirs," she said, her voice even and polite. "He was mortified by the earlier accident and offers this with his compliments. He hopes it will restore the spirit of the evening." She placed the glasses on the table, one directly in front of Arthur, one in front of Sterling. To a casual observer, the action was unremarkable. But Arthur watched her hands, her eyes. As she set down Sterling's glass, her left thumb hidden from Sterling's view by the tray, brushed the rim for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was the signal. That was the glass. But how to make the switch, Arthur couldn't just reach over and swap them. He needed another diversion, a moment of misdirection. He thought back to his conversation with Anouk in the hallway. Men like Sterling are arrogant. Their greatest weakness is their pride. Arthur picked up his own glass, the safe one. He swirled the liquid, admiring its color. "A magnificent drink," he mused aloud. "You know, Sterling, it takes a certain kind of genius to appreciate the finer things. Not just to afford them, but to understand their story, their history." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "It's the same in business. People see our success, the final product. They don't see the grit, the clever moves, the sheer audacity it takes to build something from nothing." He paused, looking Sterling directly in the eye. "Tell me, how did you really do it, Blackwood Dynamics? You were so young. To come out of nowhere and secure those polymer patents. That wasn't just business. That was artistry." It was the perfect bait. He wasn't accusing. He was praising, appealing to the very core of Sterling's narcissism. Sterling preened. A self-satisfied smirk spread across his face. "Artistry," he repeated, savoring the word. "I like that. You're right, Arthur. People have no idea. They see the name, the money. They don't see the vision." He leaned back, expansive and boastful. "Everyone thought Alistair Dubois was the genius, the absent-minded professor from Lyon." Arthur's heart hammered in his chest. Anouk was hovering nearby, ostensibly checking on another table, but her entire being was focused on them. Her pen, the tiny recording device, was ready. "Dubois," Arthur said, feigning a thoughtful frown. "The name is vaguely familiar. The one who had that scandal, wasn't it? A scandal of his own making." Sterling scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "The man was a fraud, a brilliant mind for theory, but he couldn't execute. He was lost. I saw the potential in his raw data potential. He was too blind and timid to grasp. I took his scribbles and I turned them into an empire." This was the moment. As Sterling was lost in his own monologue, basking in the glory of his self-proclaimed genius, Arthur initiated the final move. He raised his glass as if for a closer look, bringing it near his face. Then, with a calculated, almost theatrical gesture of bringing the conversation to a head, he leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table. In that single fluid movement, he placed his own glass down on the tablecloth, and with the same hand smoothly slid Sterling's glass from its coaster into the spot where his had just been. His other hand simultaneously moved Sterling's coaster to the now empty space in front of him. It was a classic magician's swap, executed under the cover of impassioned speech. It took less than 2 seconds. "I built this empire, Arthur, not him." Sterling finished, his chest puffed with pride. "Blackwood Dynamics is mine, forged by my will, my vision." "Then it is your vision I toast," Arthur said, his voice ringing with false sincerity. He picked up the glass that was now in front of him, the safe one which had started the maneuver in Sterling's spot. He held it high. Sterling, blinded by his own ego, didn't notice a thing. He simply reached for the glass directly in front of him, the glass intended for Arthur, the glass containing his own treacherous poison. "To my vision," Sterling declared, his voice booming with triumph. He clinked his glass against Arthur's with a sharp, definitive crack of crystal. Then, without another moment's hesitation, he tossed back the entire drink. Arthur merely wet his lips with his own scotch, his eyes cold as chips of granite fixed on Sterling's face. He watched as Sterling swallowed a look of ultimate satisfaction on his face. The trap was sprung. The reckoning had begun. Now all they could do was wait. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Sterling placed his empty glass on the table with a triumphant thud and launched into a series of anecdotes about his early business victories, each story polished to a high sheen of self-aggrandizement. Arthur listened patiently, nodding and offering prompts, keeping the conversation flowing, giving the drug time to work its sinister magic. Anouk had retreated to the far side of the room, observing from a safe distance. The pen in her apron was capturing every word. The first sign was subtle. Sterling was in the middle of a sentence when he trailed off, a look of faint confusion clouding his features. He blinked, shaking his head slightly, as if to clear a fog. "Where was I?" he asked, his voice losing some of its booming confidence. "You were telling me about the Zurich investors," Arthur supplied calmly. "Ah, yes. Zurich," Sterling repeated, but the thread was lost. He looked down at his hands, then around the restaurant, a dawning disorientation in his pale blue eyes. "This is a lovely place. Have we ordered yet?" The amnestic agent was working. The last 20 minutes were beginning to fray and dissolve in his mind. Arthur knew it was time to pivot to probe the older, more deeply ingrained memories before the hypnotic component took full hold. "We were talking about Lyon Sterling," Arthur said, his voice low and persuasive. "About Alistair Dubois. You said you took his scribbles and turned them into an empire. That must have been an incredible risk, to take another man's work like that." Sterling's eyes, now hazy and unfocused, fixed on Arthur. The normal filters of caution and deceit were crumbling. "Risk," he murmured. "It was necessary. He was wasting it. A treasure, just sitting there. He didn't deserve it." "So you took it?" Arthur pressed his voice like a hypnotist's. "You took it all. The patents, the credit, the company." A slow, foolish smile spread across Sterling's face. It was the smile of a man unburdened by consequence. "I took it all," he confessed, his voice slurring slightly. "Every note, every formula. Left him with nothing. Had to. He would have complained, made a fuss. So I made him the fraud, my lawyers, clever boys. Buried him. It was perfect." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine, even as a wave of grim satisfaction washed over him. Anouk had been right about everything. He glanced across the room and saw her standing motionless, her hand gripping a silver tray so tightly her knuckles were white. This was her justice, raw and unfiltered, spilling from the mouth of the man who had destroyed her family. And tonight, Sterling, Arthur continued, pushing his advantage. Tonight was perfect too, wasn't it? You had a plan for me. A plan for you, Sterling echoed, nodding slowly. The drink, the special Talisker, just like Dubois. He drank too much. A weakness. You were going to sign. Give it all back. My company. His eyes widened in a moment of confused panic. Did you drink it? I can't remember. You drank it, Sterling, Arthur said softly. You drank it all. The realization hit Sterling's dissolving consciousness like a physical blow. He looked at the empty glass in front of him, then at Arthur's calm, predatory face. The fear that broke through the chemical fog was primal. No, he whispered, trying to stand, but his limbs wouldn't obey. He slumped back into the chair, his body suddenly boneless. No. What have you done? Arthur leaned back, the game now won. I've simply allowed you to enjoy your own celebration. He made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. As if on cue, 2 uniformed Geneva police officers and a man in a sharp suit. A detective stepped through the restaurant's main entrance. They moved with quiet purpose, converging on the table. The restaurant's other patrons fell silent, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths, sensing the dramatic shift in the atmosphere. Anouk walked toward. Betrayal, her steps steady and sure. She pulled the pen from her apron and handed it to the detective. Here is the full confession, Inspector Fournier, she said, her voice clear and strong. Attempted assault, corporate espionage, and a confession to the financial and professional ruin of Dr. Alistair Dubois in 2005. Inspector Fournier looked from Anouk to the barely conscious Sterling, and then to Arthur, who gave a slight confirmatory nod. Sterling Blackwood, sir, the inspector said, his voice official and final. You are under arrest. As the officers hauled a mumbling, incoherent Sterling to his feet, Arthur stood and walked over to Anouk. He looked at the young woman who had orchestrated this entire night. The ghost of Lyon had finally found her peace. He will pay for what he did, Anouk, Arthur said. I'll make sure of it. My legal team will provide your lawyers with everything they need. Thank you, Mr. Pendleton, she said, her eyes shining, not with tears of grief, but with tears of catharsis. You didn't just buy a company tonight. No, Arthur agreed, looking at the wreckage of Sterling Blackwood's life being escorted from the room. I believe I made an investment in justice. He knew that when the dust settled, he would not only acquire the assets of Blackwood Dynamics, but he would also establish the Dr. Alistair Dubois Foundation for Ethical Science, ensuring the man's name was not just cleared, but celebrated forever. It was the least he could do. His most profitable and most meaningful acquisition. The elevator that carried Anouk Dubois to the 80th floor of Pendleton Tower ascended in unnerving silence, a glass box climbing the spine of a giant. 1 month ago, she had been haunting the service corridors of a European restaurant. Today, she was an invited guest at the heart of a global empire. Below her, New York City sprawled out a breathtaking tapestry of steel and light. It was the world Arthur Pendleton commanded, a world she had only ever seen from the outside, her face pressed against the glass. For the first time in a decade, the burning coal of vengeance that had lived in her stomach was gone. In its place was a quiet, unnerving vacuum, a silence she was still learning to inhabit. She stepped out into a reception area of minimalist grandeur. No art, no plants, just a single block of black marble for a desk and a panoramic view that seemed to claim the sky itself. Arthur's personal assistant led her through a heavy door into his office. It was less a room than a command center, stark and functional, dominated by the same staggering view. Arthur Pendleton didn't decorate with art. He decorated with power. He stood to greet her, gesturing to a chair. "Anouk, thank you for coming." "Mr. Pendleton," she replied, her voice steady. She sat her back straight, a stark contrast to the deferential posture she had perfected as a waitress. "The media is calling it the Geneva Confession," Arthur began, foregoing small talk. He slid a tablet across the vast mahogany desk. The screen was filled with headlines, not just from financial papers, but from mainstream news outlets around the world. There were links to talk show segments and scathing editorials on business ethics. Sterling Blackwood's face was everywhere, a portrait of disgraced avarice. "His trial is set for December, but it's a formality," Arthur explained, his tone clinical like a surgeon describing a successful excision. The recording was irrefutable. Attempted assault using a Schedule I pharmacological agent carries a sentence that will ensure he dies in prison. My legal team also managed to uncover another of his victims, a software designer from the late 90s he pushed out in a similar, albeit less dramatic fashion. It established a legal pattern of predatory behavior. "He's finished." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "But the prison sentence is the least of it. It was the story of your father that truly buried him. Once that part of the recording found its way to the press, well, society has a way of turning on its monsters. His clubs have revoked his membership. His so-called friends won't take his calls, and his name has become a synonym for corporate evil. He has been erased from the world he valued above all else." The acquisition of Blackwood Dynamics had been a hostile takeover in all but name. Arthur's teams had moved in swiftly, and in the chaos of Sterling's arrest, the transfer of power was absolute. During the transition, my auditors went through Sterling's private vault in the Geneva headquarters. Arthur continued, his expression shifting slightly. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim leather-bound book. He pushed it gently across the desk. It was a scientific journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was elegant, precise, filled with complex chemical equations and passionate, sprawling notes in the margins. On the inside cover, in faded blue ink, was the name Dr. Alistair Dubois. "We found all of his original research notebooks," Arthur said softly. "Hidden away. Sterling couldn't bring himself to destroy them. I suppose even a man like him wanted to possess the proof of the genius he stole." Anouk reached out with a trembling hand and touched the cover, a jolt passing through her as if she were touching her father's hand. It was tangible proof. The very pages where he had poured out his soul, his dreams of a better world. "That night in Geneva you changed my perspective," Arthur admitted, his voice losing its boardroom edge. "I've spent my life acquiring companies' assets' market share. I saw Blackwood Dynamics as just another asset. But when I heard your story, I understood. A legacy isn't something you buy. It's something you build, and it has to be built on a foundation of truth. Sterling's legacy was a lie, and it crumbled the second the truth came out. Your father's legacy, built on brilliance and integrity, endured even after being buried for 20 years. He swiveled his chair to face a large, leather-bound portfolio. He opened it and turned it to face her. The cover was embossed in clean gold leaf, the Dr. Alistair Dubois Foundation for Ethical Science. I have transferred $50 million of my personal funds and secured a further 50 million from the Pendleton Core Charitable Fund to endow this foundation, he stated. Its mission is simple but absolute: to find, fund, and protect the next generation of Alistair Duboises. We will provide grants, legal protection for intellectual property, and mentorship from the top minds at Pendleton Corp. We will ensure that brilliance is never again sacrificed at the altar of greed. He looked at her, his gaze intense. A foundation of this importance cannot be run by a committee of faceless executives. It needs a heart. It needs a soul. It needs a director who understands its purpose on a cellular level. You spent a decade honing your skills: investigation, strategy, languages, unwavering focus, all for the purpose of destruction. I am asking you now to take those same formidable skills and use them for creation. Build your father's legacy anew. Run this foundation. The room fell silent. The immensity of his offer washed over her. It was more than a job, more than money. It was a restoration, a chance to transform the ashes of her past into a beacon for the future. All the pain, all the lonely years had led to this. Her father's name would not just be cleared, it would be honored, immortalized in the very work he loved. Slowly, she pushed the old notebook to the side and pulled the new portfolio towards her. She ran her finger over her father's name, then looked up at Arthur, tears shining in her eyes, but her voice was firm. "It would be my life's greatest honor," she said. "Yes." Arthur extended his hand across the desk. As she took it, the handshake was not one between a billionaire and a former waitress, but between two architects of a new legacy ready to begin the work. In the end, it wasn't about the billion-dollar deal. It was about a single whispered sentence that unraveled a web of deceit decades in the making. Arthur Pendleton walked into that restaurant, a ruthless businessman. But he walked out a purveyor of a long overdue reckoning. Sterling Blackwood lost everything: his company, his freedom, and his reputation, all destroyed by the poison he intended for another. And Anouk Dubois, the quiet waitress, finally brought justice to her father's name, proving that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or power, but a promise made at a graveside. This story is a stark reminder that even in the highest echelons of power, a single voice of truth can change everything. What would you have done in Arthur's position? Would you have trusted the whisper? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story of intrigue and justice captivated you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good twist, and subscribe for more true-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these incredible tales to light.